had when the British man of war went there in 1814, and they suggested to John Adams that it would be wise not to come to the landing place because it was too difficult for him to get down. But if he made it there, they may have taken him away from the island because they didn't really want to do that. John Adams was the leader, the school teacher, the whole leader of the community at that time. Now, this is engineering workshops around here, storage facilities for electrical implements and so forth. So we move on. And this is Bounty Bay. When we get up to the edge, that is the edge before we look back down on the landing place there. And boat number 2 is coming in with another load of cargo. Now, the remains of the Bounty was found out here, just off from this rock. In 22 feet of water is where we found the majority of the remains. The last cannon was taken up about 6 years ago, which is over in Australia at this time. Hopefully it will come back a bit good. But there are not much to be seen there any longer. There are these ballasts from the Bounty, but that's about all. Heavy seas come in there very, very frequently, and unless something is really tight into the bottom, it will be washed in shortly. So that is where. Now, we've had a plaque there commemorating or honoring the mutineers since last year, or since 1990. And then January 23 of this year, a second plaque was put on honoring our Polynesian mothers, grandmothers, great-great-great-grandmothers, because without them, I'm sure the mutineers would not have been able to survive. They were able to cook the local food. They were able to thatch the roofs out of the pandanus palm leaves, and it is nice to know at least they have been honored after all these years. Now, this anchor was taken on Ducie, or the Arcadia. Arcadia was wrecked in 1881 on Ducie Island, and the anchor was brought there in 1990 by the World Discoverer. It's been chipped up and painted since then. But Betty's mother, her dad, was on the Arcadia. That is Betty's grandfather. And he came to the island, and he stopped up there. Well, they all came to the island, but he stopped up, got married, and raised 10 children. Ducie is 300 miles from it here. Looking at the machinery there, these were the machinery that had accumulated there for the project prior to our leaving, or about the time we were leaving in April of this year. They even drove for water. I don't know exactly whether they did have enough water because I left. Do you know?
It rained a lot as well.
Oh, it rained a lot as well. But there's been a problem with water supply on the island all through the years. That is why the Pitcairns were moved to Norfolk in 1856. Shortage of water. Springs would dry up. And so they drove for water, and they got seepage water, but the drill broke and they weren't able to go down to sea level, which is what they would have liked to have done. But the engineers in charge in New Zealand stopped the drilling, and they use what they can for doing the concrete. And this is the first drilling rig that's ever been done. I believe they got down to about 97 meters, I think, something like that. And this is the bulldozer dragging up the timber from the landing place. And now with the concrete road, I'm sure they won't allow the wheels, the metal crawlers to crawl on the concrete. But we've been using that for several years. And the timbers are dropped off to wherever they are this time to go.
That's Mike's wife, the other wife.
Oh, I didn't even. Yeah, Mike's wife Brenda, you see Brenda. Now this is the last of the wooden boat, built in 1982-83. This one was 45 feet long. It's the biggest of the wooden boats. But we can only get, generally speaking, about 10, 12 years of service from one of these boats. Going out alongside these ships that bring cargo from New Zealand, sometimes it's very, very rough. And we'd go out, as long as we could get through the bay, we'll go out and try and bring the cargo ashore. And this is left like sort of a museum. He's there now, because it is the last one. And we have found that the aluminium boats are very, very practical. They're sturdy and they work well. Communications and housing on the island. Housing, to give some idea what houses are like, we build with corrugated iron roofing. Some of the government ones are now going to aluminium. We have hot water system, burnt with stainless steel tanks set in concrete, and it's very, very practical. We have a hot water service into the house. This particular building is a government one. And then communication. Up until 1992, we had, 1985, it was all Morse code. Everything that sent out to the island used to be, we sent out weather reports twice daily by little Morse code. And then telephone service, it was via radio, via New Zealand. 1992, satellite communications came in. It was expensive to make telephone calls from the island. It was $15 a minute. And that is quite steep. But then the government, quite a number of years ago now, they brought in email. This was government use only. Betty is just doing email there. And then we had private email service just over 3 years ago. There's only one store on the island. It used to be a cooperative store. It's now just a general store. And you could buy most things, food stuff, even hardware, and even building material, timber and that too. It's not like the supermarket, but we get the necessities in, and it's all bought from New Zealand. Years ago, a number of years ago, we used to get food supplies from the UK as well, but not now. We come to what is known as the square, the public square. We have the church on the left, we have the government mayor's office and secretary's office in here. We have a library with video, DVD, and books, and the post office here. Then we have what used to be the courthouse. We generally refer, both courthouse or public hall. And the building is used for games and parties and whatever as well. And this is the building, looking at it from a square angle. And this is a museum that wasn't finished when we left. They finished, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks after we left. It was completed, and it was opened up by the governor and the commissioner. I'm not too sure, but it's about 3 months ago now. But it's nice to have a museum, a proper building, and we would like to get some of the artifacts that have gone overseas. Most things have been taken away from Pitcairn. The Bounty Vice, for example, around 1937 or something like that. This American came there and said, "I'll give you a brand new vice if I could take the old one away." So he just gave the old vice. And that's the sort of thing that happened. The Bounty Bible was given to one of the whaling ships today, but that was returned back to Pitcairn in 1950. This is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the only church on the island, and the people were converted to the Seventh-day Adventist faith in 1890, 100 years after they landed there. Prior to that, they were following the Bible, and John Adams was the leader. Church of England was the religion. Inside the church, just to give some idea what it looks like, we renovated the building over the last year or two, and it's in fairly good shape. It's just over 60 feet long. Seating capacity is approximately 150. And this is the Bounty Bible. That's kept in the church. At this time, I'm not sure whether they will try to move it to the museum or not. It's open every week to make sure there's no bugs eating into it. It's interesting. In the book of Psalms, you could almost see fingerprints, because this book and the Church of England prayer book was the only textbooks that John Adams had to teach the young people to read and write. John Adams himself was an uneducated man, and he was taught as much as could by Edward Young to read and write and help teach the young people. And when the colony was growing up, there were 23 young people who need to be taught and Adams did his best to teach them and to read and write until outside influence came in. But the colony was discovered in 1808. That's 18 years after the Indians landed there. And when the first whaling ship, the Topaz, came to the island, two men paddled up in this canoe, and they called the master, "Would you heave us a rope?" That stunned the captain. Polynesians, the South Pacific speaking English, and then the story unfolded that the mutineers had landed on Pitcairn, and that was their hiding place. Just to give an idea of the Polynesians or the Pitcairners, a mixture. I think, generally speaking, probably the Europeans have taken over more than the Tahitians. I'm very dark Polynesian. Fletcher Christian actually went back one step when his son married the young girl who came on the bounty. A 15-year-old girl came, and he married her. And so he went one step back into Polynesia, whereas the others were straight on. The post office was, first postal stamps were issued back in 1940. And stamps have kept the island going as far as revenue, not today. Today it's expensive. For a ship to bring supplies from New Zealand costs approximately $50,000. That is one day unloading about 4 containers of cargo. Inside the post office, the customers are just being served. And we have election every year. The island mayor is elected every 3 years, and then there are 10 members on the council. They are elected annually. The island secretary is appointed by the governor, but election day, and then a few weeks, around the second week in December, we would vote the members for the island council. This is the Bounty anchor. It was taken up in 1957. It was discovered in 57. We were diving at that time when this group of Americans came on the Brigantine Yankee, and one of their divers actually found the anchor. It apparently was thrown overboard from the stern to stop the ship from drifting in on the rocks. Inside the public hall, we have a church luncheon about once a month or thereabouts. Official council meeting are held every month inside this building. Then if there are any officials, we have a party there. Governor's representative or governor or come to the island. We have Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip on there. These are cannonballs taken up from the Bounty. Quite a lot of them have been found over the years. These and for the small cannons that they have. The problem with them, unless you keep them moist, keep them in oil or in water, they tend to dry out and they disintegrate. But that is Bounty cannonballs. This jar was landed when they arrived at Pitcairn on the Bounty. Unfortunately, it's been taken away. The family who owned it is in New Zealand. I would like to see things like this come back to the island because it really belongs to Pitcairn. But that is the Bounty jar, no longer on the island. The Seventh-day Adventist pastor and his wife has been the nurse on the island for many years. They come out on a 2-year term from Australia and New Zealand, and there's been 2 couples from the USA. But this is the mission house where they live. We have the healthcare center. A very, very nice building. It has most of the facilities. We now have a doctor on the island. They rotate every 3 months. And it's nice to have a doctor on the island if you have something serious. But we still have no way of evacuating in a real emergency. When that girl just about lost her arm last December, the ship took her to Mangareva. That was 2 days. When they flew her to Tahiti, which is 3 days. And that is about the quickest in a real emergency. 3 days could be a long time. The governor's representative, as of from the last few years, there's been a governor's representative. The governor of Pitcairn is the British High Commissioner to New Zealand. His representative is up here. We have 2 of the MOD police out of London. most of them, a lot of them seem to be from Scotland, but they come on a 3-month tour, and it is nice to have these men on the island because they don't have any relatives, and they're very friendly. They're able to come and help us do any jobs that we want, and it's nice to have those policemen. Mike's wife Brenda is the local police and immigration officer on the island. Banyan trees. There are several banyan trees, I think about 6 on the island, different parts, planted by the early Polynesians. It's a tree that sends down a root and it gradually walks. It takes many years to do it, but it sends roots down and the part in the middle gradually dies and the banyan keeps moving on. But it's a beautiful big tree. This is where we live, on Fletcher Christian site. Now I've often joked to people when we were digging the soil there, I said, this is Fletcher Christian site, we might find the gold on the boundary. We didn't find anything. But I've always thought, at that time, they would have some gold to pay for the cost of it. I've heard since that the British government had this letter of credit that the captain signed, and that was the payment. But, you know, the boundary was repaired in South Africa, and just what payment they actually got for it, or how they got the payment, I don't know. Some of you experts, would any of you know? No, it's something we don't really know too much about. To give an idea of what interior houses of the houses today are, this is a party we were having in our place at Christmas time, and it's always been customary for us to use fork and knives for food, for having meals. We would serve the food on the table, but in some parts of Polynesia, the people would get down on the mat, or they would eat that way, and I know some Polynesians, they even eat with a fork and knife, freedom. So, but that has always been the way. Move along housing. This young man, he's my nephew actually, in Auckland now, but his house, he built it off logs, treated logs, and this building is being rented each month for the doctors coming to the island. But different styles of building, but we get all the materials from New Zealand. First of all, we have Christian's Cave up there, towering out on the western side of Adamstown. This is the school building, built in 1940, finished in 1948. And then the schoolmaster's building. The school teachers have come from New Zealand all through the years when this was built in 1948. And the building, I understand, talked to the commissioner the other day, they hope to go ahead within the next year to try and replace that. Termites are bad on the island. They tend to eat wood, and unless it's termite treated, a house doesn't last all that long. Inside the school, New Zealand school teacher gives some idea of the schooling. When I was going to school, there were 37 children in school. Today there's only about 5 or 6, very, very few. They hope to rebuild the school building and have it for preschoolers, school children, and adult education, like computers and that. Hope that will work out. We rebuilt the school master's residence last year. Very, very nice building inside. Exactly as the old one was. Christian's Cave, up in the mountain. There is a trail that goes along there, and then you walk up, sort of almost crawl up. It's steep, getting up across there. Then if you don't like heights, it's not too good coming across here. And if we get tourists coming into the island, it will have to be improved so that they could safely get across there. History has it that Fletcher Christian was up there regularly. There is this tunnel, which is a short way down from the cave. You could get up, it's difficult though. And that is up near Christian's Cave. And the cave itself is just a scoop in the mountain. It's really not a cave as such. As a youngster, a group of young boys, we've slept in that cave. We go and cut a whole lot of dry bananas, that's our knack. And you start off with one about 3 feet high, you know, and then when you wake up in the morning, it's solid. Looking out on Adamstown, the only settlement on the island. This is the school building down here, the residence here. This is where we live, but that is the big banyan trees, or one of them. Huge trees they are. And I guess a lot of you have seen banyan trees, but they're unusual. The square is up here. Yes, here's the square there. And then Boundary Way, of course, looking east. Now, Simon Young, he's from England, and his wife Shirley from Riverside, California. They moved to the island about 5 years ago now, and they want to live as residents of the island. First that they've done that for a long, long time. And so they've built 2 little houses. He wanted to build about 4 houses, little houses, rather than one big one. And we thought it was a stupid idea. But he built the first one, and they had all their belongings in it. And they were sleeping in this one down there. And this was about 2.5 weeks before we left. Fire broke out in the building. Not too sure what caused it. Might have been mosquito coils, or not sure. But about 4:30 in the morning, when the alarm went off, or 5 o'clock, the house was on fire. We went out, but there was nothing we could do. It was completely burned. And the community gave them food and clothing and all that to get them started. And I'm not sure what progress. Has he completed his number 2? All finished?
Kitchen and everything.
Oh, well, he's done well. Rebuilt. Luckily, the timber wasn't near the fire, and he was able to use that for rebuilding. But he's been working hard. And it's nice to see. It would be nice to have some new blood even come to the island and get a mixture in community. Now, moving up toward the hill there, out to the west of John Adams' grave. This is the only mutineer that we know of his burial place is. It is possible that Edward Young might have been buried under the courthouse or the public hall, because there is a cemetery there. There's one huge marble headstone there, put there by one of the captains on the whaling ships. His wife was sick, and he left her on the island, and when he returned back to the island, she was dead. And that used to be the cemetery up until he went to Norfolk Island. And John Adams was buried on his house site. There are no Adamses on the island. All the Adams went to Norfolk when the total population was moved, almost 200, about 197 people, were moved to Norfolk Island in 1856. In 1861, 2 of the families returned. 1863, another group. But the majority stayed on Norfolk. And there are approximately 2,000 Norfolk Islanders living there. And there's approximately 2,000 tourists. The island is very much tourist-oriented. But these men came over in 1990, I think it was, to visit, and they were standing by John Adams' grave. He was 65 years old. He died in 1829. And all the history books that you probably have read, John Adams was a very old man, so they say. That worries me. 65 years. Moving up the hill a little bit, we come to Michael and Royal's place. We build with New Zealand timber, corrugated iron roofing, plywood, or we used to use HardieFlex, which is a type of, we call it HardieFlex in New Zealand. We moved further up to Paul, and his house, he hasn't painted it. His family lived there. We come up a little further up to Dave Brown and his wife and 3 children, one in New Zealand in school. And then we come up a little further. I'm sure Mike knows where this place is. Mike and Brenda and Andrew, they live here. A nice view, looking out. And then a little further up we come to Wayne and Charlene and their children. Just to give you an idea, because many people have asked, what sort of houses do you live in? And further up the hill is Randy, Christian, Nadine, and their family, moving out of Adamstown. Up at the radio station, 900 feet above sea level. It was built during the war years in 1943-44. There were New Zealand Army personnel there manning the radio. We never did see any enemy ships around Pitcairn. There's been different stories that there was a German radar that passed close by the island, but I don't know too much about that. Anyway, the building has been turned over to the radio hams. It's not, at the moment, not being used official communication, and we send out weather reports. We mail the reports once a month from here, because we used to send it out twice daily. Now there is an automatic weather station there that sends out reports every 3 hours, 24 hours a day. A little further out we have the seismic vault. This grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Several years ago they brought instruments to the island so that we could monitor earth tremors. And then we mail the tapes back to them, generally 3, 4, 5 months later. And then they'd be able to look at the records. But about 3.5 years later, 3.5 years ago, nearly 4 years, they brought out equipment to monitor it constantly because we were having several earth tremors, and that was kind of scary. About 4 or 5 a day, and we know they are 2 underwater volcanoes out to the southeast, about 28 miles, I think, and 23 miles to the south. They would, and when these quakes were shaking the pictures on the wall, I thought it was swinging it. And it was a bit scary. And then now they're able to trace down. It stopped after about 3 months, and we haven't had anything since. But the advantage in them, with them doing that, they had brought a band with them they need for themselves, and they brought what we have now as email for the island. Things have been modified and changed a little bit. Everyone from Adamstown could get direct, if they can't get direct to the transmitting station out here, they'd come to this relay station out here on the western, again it's originally called Hotel Point, and then that relays it across the transmitting station. Email is a great asset to us there. It used to take up to 6 months if you wanted to find out details about anything overseas. Now within 15 minutes, if the other person is on the other end, we could get this by, which is amazing. Now another industry that the administration is promoting is beehive. This is Michael, so I came past that day, I took a few pictures. We're trying to increase the beehive. When I left there were about 66 hives on the island. We send honey, it's very expensive postage, the spindle. And Japan has said they'll take all the honey that we could produce, so far it's been sent in bulk. I think London has offered to buy them too, so we'll increase the honey. Gardening on the island, we don't have much in the way of irrigation. Down around the homes, but out on the hills, we plant the common vegetables, all the common vegetables. And when Betty and I left the island, we had our garden out on the hills.